There are moments in nature when the ordinary transforms into the extraordinary, when something as familiar as mist, vapor, or fog can take on a life of its own, leaving even the most seasoned observers frozen in awe. Across windswept coastlines, quiet fields, and forgotten valleys, an eerie phenomenon has been quietly unfurling, gathering whispers from those lucky, or perhaps unlucky, enough to witness it firsthand. Imagine standing at the edge of a grassy plain, the horizon blurred in a silvery haze, when suddenly, a wall of dense, churning fog begins to advance. It's not drifting lazily like the morning mist you might expect. No, this fog moves with an unsettling purpose, rolling, swirling, and breathing almost as if guided by an invisible will. For those who have watched it creep forward, consuming everything in its path, it's an image that refuses to leave their minds. A curtain of white so thick and so strangely alive that it seems to pulse with its own heartbeat. At first glance, one might assume it's merely a trick of the wind, a playful dance of moisture and air across the Earth's surface. But as you continue to watch, a quiet tension builds in the pit of your stomach. There's something different about this fog, something uncanny. It gathers itself into roiling shapes, almost as if unseen hands are stirring it from within. Patches billow and collapse, thickening and thinning with unnatural precision, refusing to behave like the sleepy, drifting mists we know so well. Witnesses often speak of the way it seems to stalk the ground, clinging low and dense, moving not with the chaotic freedom of wild weather, but in deliberate, almost rhythmic waves. It wraps itself around trees, flows into empty streets, and blots out the world behind it with an unsettling finality. Across different corners of the world, people have stumbled upon this baffling sight. Sometimes it appears just after sunset, when the last light dies and the air cools with sudden sharpness. Other times, it rolls in during the dead hours of night, swallowing highways, towns, and open fields with no warning and no sound save the faintest hiss, like a whispered warning carried on the breeze. There's a stillness that follows in its wake, a kind of suspended animation where time seems to slow and even the natural world grows quiet. Birds hush their songs, insects fall silent, and even the rustling of the trees seems to pause, as if nature itself is holding its breath. Photographs and videos struggle to capture the true essence of these fog walls. A static image freezes only a moment, unable to convey the slow, deliberate way the mist folds in upon itself, shifting in hypnotic, dreamlike patterns. Viewers who witness it in person describe a sense of being watched, as if the fog itself is aware of their presence. There's an undeniable psychological pull, the primal urge to step back, to find shelter, to get somewhere safe before the advancing mass reaches you. And yet, it is mesmerizing. People find themselves rooted to the spot, unable to look away, drawn deeper into the mystery of it with every creeping inch. Local legends have begun to spring up around these events, stories whispered over campfires and in late-night conversations between those who swear they've seen it with their own eyes. Accounts vary, but one theme runs constant: this fog is unlike anything ordinary. It doesn't just obscure the landscape, it seems to replace it, reshaping familiar places into a different, eerie world where landmarks vanish, sounds distort, and the very air feels heavy with an electric anticipation. It is as though the fog pulls a veil between reality and something else, something older, deeper, and infinitely more mysterious. For now, the question lingers heavily in the air: what exactly is this moving wall of fog? Is there a scientific explanation waiting just beyond the mist? Or is there something more unsettling at play? Before we dive into the possible causes, let's take a closer look at the strange, unshakable impact this phenomenon is having on those who witness it. As we peel back the layers of this phenomenon, one undeniable truth emerges: the wall of fog moving with such eerie purpose demands an explanation that reaches beyond the everyday. Its behavior, so unsettling and deliberate, hints at forces both natural and intricate, woven into the subtle dance between land, air, and water. To truly begin unraveling this mystery, we must first look not to the supernatural, but to the Earth's own quiet mechanics, the unseen processes that can give birth to such strange and mesmerizing spectacles. Among the most compelling explanations is a phenomenon known as temperature inversion, a rare atmospheric event that, under the right conditions, can transform simple fog into something that seems to breathe with life. At first mention, temperature inversion might sound clinical, distant, a technical term better suited to a textbook than the strange, almost sentient wall of mist we've witnessed. But when you dive deeper into what this phenomenon truly entails, it becomes clear that there is something almost magical about the way it reshapes the natural world. Typically, in our everyday experience, air temperature decreases with height. The ground is warmer, and as you move upward into the atmosphere, the air becomes cooler. This gradient helps maintain a natural flow of air currents, allowing moisture and heat to rise and disperse. However, when a temperature inversion occurs, that familiar order is flipped on its head. A layer of warmer air traps the cooler, heavier air beneath it, creating a kind of atmospheric lid. In this trapped space, moisture can no longer easily escape upward. Instead, it accumulates, condenses, and thickens. As the cooler air hugs the ground and is squeezed between the earth and the warmer air above, it becomes the perfect cradle for dense, heavy fog. But this isn't the gentle, wispy fog that glides along hillsides in the early morning hours. No, this is something far more concentrated, more structured, and more prone to the kind of dramatic, rolling movements that leave viewers breathless. The inversion locks the fog into place, creating a boundary, a defined wall between the visible and the hidden. And within that boundary, subtle shifts in temperature, slight eddies of wind, and the irregularities of the terrain itself can give rise to movement that appears almost purposeful. Under a strong inversion, the fog does not simply float. It crawls, it undulates, and it folds itself over the landscape with an intensity that feels alive. Hills and valleys guide its flow, funneling the mist into channels and corridors where it surges forward, gathering mass and momentum. Tiny differences in ground temperature, a patch of warmer earth here, a cooler dip there, can create unseen currents within the fog bank, sending tendrils and waves rolling outward in patterns that seem, to the casual observer, deliberate and animate. Imagine standing on a deserted road as this massive wall of mist approaches. You can feel the change in the air, a damp coolness, a sudden hush, as if the very atmosphere is being compressed against the earth. The leading edge of the fog does not fray into harmless wisps. It advances as a solid front, a gleaming, shifting wall that blots out the stars behind it. Watching it unfold under the heavy lid of an inversion is like witnessing the slow, inevitable march of a living thing, deliberate, unhurried, but utterly unstoppable. And it's not just the visual spectacle that catches your breath. The very soundscape around you changes. Under a temperature inversion, sound behaves differently as well. Lower, denser air tends to bend sound waves toward the ground rather than allowing them to disperse upward. Ordinary noises, the distant hum of traffic, the bark of a dog, even your own footsteps, take on a muffled, distorted quality. In some cases, distant sounds can seem unnaturally close, their origins impossible to pinpoint. In other instances, an eerie silence falls, broken only by the faint, damp whisper of the fog as it shifts across the landscape. This warping of sound, combined with the physical presence of the fog, creates an environment that feels otherworldly, disconnected from the familiar rules of reality. In many ways, a temperature inversion creates the perfect stage for fear, wonder, and imagination to take root. Even for those who understand the science, standing in the presence of such a phenomenon can stir ancient, primal instincts, the feeling that something powerful and beyond human control is at work. It's easy to see how, in ages past, such events might have been interpreted as omens, as the breath of spirits, or as the boundary between the living world and something darker, something hidden. Temperature inversions are most common during the colder months, especially in valleys and low-lying areas where cold air can settle and become trapped. Calm, clear nights with little to no wind provide the ideal conditions. Without stirring air currents to disrupt it, the inversion can strengthen, allowing the fog to thicken and behave in these extraordinary ways. Urban areas, too, can fall under the influence of an inversion, particularly when a layer of pollutants gets trapped along with the moisture, adding a dull, yellowish tinge to the fog and making it seem even more foreign and sinister. Yet even knowing all this, even understanding the mechanics at play, there remains something haunting about watching such a fog form and move. Inversions create a kind of temporary, upside-down world where the rules we rely on, warm air rising, sounds traveling freely, clear skies meaning safety, no longer apply. In their place is a realm of distortion, silence, and movement that feels closer to a dream or a myth than to waking life. When you see that wall of fog moving toward you under the grip of a powerful inversion, it doesn't matter that you can name the process shaping it. Deep down, you still feel it, the shiver that runs along your spine, the subtle, electric pull of the unknown. And so, while temperature inversion offers a convincing and scientifically grounded explanation for the living, breathing quality of these fog walls, it also opens a window into the deeper, more emotional reactions we have to the mysteries of nature. It reminds us that even in a world mapped by satellites and explained by equations, there are still moments when the Earth can astonish us, when it can summon forth sights and experiences that make us feel small, awestruck, and very, very human. While the basic mechanics of a temperature inversion explain much of the fog's uncanny behavior, there are deeper subtleties within this phenomenon that weave an even more intricate story, layers of complexity that elevate a simple shift in air temperature into something bordering on the surreal. For behind the curtain of the inversion lies a delicate interplay of microclimates, energy exchanges, and invisible forces that sculpt the very shape and movement of the fog wall. In many ways, a temperature inversion acts like a glass dome placed over a living, breathing world. Within this dome, the natural mixing of air is halted, and instead of chaos, a strange kind of order begins to emerge. Minute variations in surface materials, the cooling of asphalt, the lingering warmth of stone, the moisture seeping from soil, all start to matter in ways they normally wouldn't. These tiny, localized differences in temperature create miniature pressure zones, each subtly tugging at the fog, pushing and pulling it into folds and ridges like the slow shifting of tectonic plates. From a distance, these invisible nudges give the fog its serpentine movements, its rolling, pulsing presence that seems animated by some hidden will. The longer an inversion persists, the more pronounced these effects become. Overnight inversions are common, but when one holds steady for days, sometimes longer in valleys shielded from strong weather systems, the air mass beneath becomes increasingly stratified. Layer upon layer of slightly different air temperatures and humidities build up, stacking the atmosphere into a fragile tower of cards. Every layer affects how the fog behaves. Some trap it tightly against the ground, while others allow it to bulge upward, creating ripples and folds in the mist that, to the naked eye, look less like weather and more like the slow pulse of a sleeping giant. Even the gentle touch of the rising or setting sun can influence this trapped fog in surprising ways. When dawn's first light strikes the chilled earth, the ground begins to warm ever so slightly, disturbing the bottommost layers of the inversion. As that trapped cool air tries to respond, the fog above it stirs, rising and rolling in slow, deliberate waves. It is in these moments, caught between night and day, that the fog seems to breathe, a heavy, mist-laden breath that stretches outward with an almost aching patience. Observers often describe the sensation of watching the fog at sunrise as something deeply unsettling, as though the landscape itself were awakening beneath their feet. And yet, the most astonishing aspect of a strong inversion may not be the fog's movement itself, but the strange, shifting thresholds it creates, the unseen borders where one world ends and another begins. Step out of the clear air and into the thick of the fog, and you cross an invisible frontier. One moment you stand in crisp, biting cold. The next, you're engulfed in a wet, muffled twilight where sound is muted, shapes are blurred, and the world feels condensed into a small, intimate bubble around you. These transitions are often so abrupt that they can disorient even seasoned travelers, making familiar paths and landmarks vanish into the amorphous gray. Inside the heart of the fog, visibility can shrink to mere feet. A solitary tree, a parked car, or a lamppost might emerge suddenly from the void, looming close and distorted, only to disappear again as you move. It becomes difficult to gauge distance or direction. The world inside an inversion-driven fog is not merely obscured, it is transformed, reshaped into a labyrinth of uncertainty where even the act of walking feels strangely weightless and detached. It's no wonder that ancient tales so often described such mists as gateways to other realms, places where the normal rules of time and space falter. There is also a curious emotional response triggered by being caught within such a dense, inversion-fueled fog. Researchers have noted that prolonged exposure to heavy fog can induce a phenomenon known as sensory deprivation, a condition where the brain, starved of familiar visual and auditory cues, begins to generate its own. In the deepest parts of these fogs, travelers sometimes report hearing phantom footsteps, whispering voices, or catching glimpses of shapes at the very edge of vision, hallucinations born not from madness, but from the mind's desperate attempt to fill the blankness. These psychological effects are subtle, but real, and they add another layer to the eerie lifelike quality of a moving fog wall. It is not only the body that is enveloped, but the mind as well. Interestingly, not all temperature inversions create the same kind of fog behavior. Certain geographical features can dramatically intensify the effect. In coastal regions, for instance, where cold ocean currents meet warmer inland air, massive and persistent inversions can trap fog banks that stretch for miles, advancing inland with the slow, steady crawl of a glacier. In river valleys, inversions often form in the dead of night and linger well into the morning, their fogs winding along the river's path like living serpents. In mountainous areas, cold air pooling under inversions can create layers of fog that settle into bowls and basins, sitting so perfectly still that from above they look like frozen seas of cotton. Each of these settings sculpts the behavior of the fog, guiding its movements, dictating its density, and shaping its eerie character. No two fog walls formed under inversion are ever quite alike. Each is a unique creature, molded by the quirks of the terrain and the silent tug of atmospheric forces. Some flow quickly, streaming like waterfalls down hillsides. Others sit motionless, their edges defined and sharp, daring the curious to cross into their depths. Still others pulse and writhe, responding to the slightest whisper of wind with slow, deliberate undulations that seem far too coordinated to be random. And so, as we peer closer into the phenomenon of temperature inversions, we find that they are not merely a cause of these living walls of fog. They are the architects of entire temporary worlds. They reshape the landscape into something unfamiliar, something enchanted and unsettling at once. They take the ordinary components of our world, water, air, earth, and for a brief time, rearrange them into something that feels other. And though the science behind it can be explained, the experience of standing before that advancing wall of mist, feeling it breathe and shift, reminds us that there is always a place where understanding ends and awe begins. The next step, then, is to ask, could there be even more factors at play here, hidden within the folds of the mist, waiting to reveal themselves? Yet as fascinating and intricate as the dance of temperature inversions may be, they are not the only architects capable of conjuring these sprawling walls of living fog. In fact, there are instances where the inversion alone cannot account for the sheer scale, persistence, or eerie movement patterns observed. Sometimes, the fog seems to arrive from somewhere else entirely, not built upon the spot like a delicate house of cards, but rather, marching in from distant horizons with purpose and momentum, as though summoned by unseen hands far beyond the immediate landscape. In these moments, attention naturally turns toward the coasts, toward the vast, restless meeting grounds between land and sea. Here, another powerful force comes into play, one that can breathe entire oceans of mist onto the land with an almost tidal regularity. It is a phenomenon deeply tied to the heartbeat of the earth itself, the subtle but constant exchanges of heat, moisture, and motion between water and air. And when the right conditions align, they give rise to something far greater than localized fog. They summon colossal marine layers that roll inland like silent tsunamis of vapor, swallowing coastlines, forests, and cities alike in their ghostly advance. Unlike the delicate balance of a temperature inversion hovering just above the ground, marine layers are born of massive, sprawling systems that stretch for hundreds of miles across the ocean's surface. They are nurtured by the cold currents that snake through the world's oceans, cooling the air directly above them, and creating a vast, chilled blanket that lies in wait just offshore. This blanket, rich with moisture and heavy with potential, often remains dormant, invisible to the naked eye, hidden beneath the bright blue skies and golden sunlight that dance above. But hidden does not mean inactive. Beneath the surface calm, the ingredients for a dramatic transformation quietly gather strength. The chilled ocean air, trapped below layers of warmer air aloft, becomes saturated with moisture drawn up from the sea itself. Droplets form, clustering together, thickening into mist. What begins as an invisible veil gradually thickens into a sprawling, continent-sized mass of fog, hovering just offshore, waiting for the slightest invitation to move. That invitation often comes in the form of subtle shifts, the dying down of daytime winds, the cooling of coastal landmasses after sunset, or the slight inland pull of low-pressure systems. When the call comes, the marine layer responds with a slow but inexorable advance. It pushes inland, sliding over beaches, cliffs, and valleys like a living thing, engulfing the world in a matter of hours. To those standing on the shoreline, the sight is nothing short of mesmerizing, a towering wall of white, moving with hypnotic grace, erasing the horizon, swallowing the sun, and replacing vibrant colors with an endless, undulating gray. What makes marine layers particularly compelling, and at times deeply unsettling, is the scale and momentum they bring. Unlike ground-hugging fog banks that drift and linger at the whims of local terrain, a fully formed marine layer possesses mass and inertia. It surges forward, reshaping everything it touches. The tallest skyscrapers can find their tops severed by its leading edge. Bridges vanish into nothingness. Hills and trees, which seemed sturdy and rooted only moments before, are lost beneath the creeping tide. Entire cities have been known to disappear into marine layers so thick that daylight itself seems to vanish, replaced by an eternal, heavy twilight. Moreover, these coastal fogs do not simply drift and swirl. They flow with a weight and a presence that almost seems deliberate. Watch closely, and you may notice how the fog coils around hillsides, hugs the contours of river valleys, and funnels itself into urban corridors like water seeking the path of least resistance. To observers, it can feel as though the mist is exploring the land, testing boundaries, seeping into every available crevice with a patient, inexorable hunger. It is a movement at once methodical and unstoppable, a force of nature that does not rush but simply consumes. Within the marine layer, the sensory experience shifts dramatically. The thick fog muffles sound, creating an uncanny silence broken only by the faintest of echoes, a distant horn, a muted footstep, a whispered gust of wind. Light becomes diffuse and disorienting, erasing shadows, flattening the world into a landscape without depth. Walking through it feels like moving through a dreamscape, where distances stretch and shrink without warning, and familiar landmarks become ghostly suggestions rather than solid points of reference. Time itself seems to slow beneath the weight of the mist, each moment lingering longer than it should, heavy with unreality. Yet for all its ghostly beauty, the marine layer is not simply a passive drape cast over the land. It is an active participant in the shaping of local climates, ecosystems, and even cultures. Coastal forests owe their lush greenery to the moisture carried inland by these fogs, which drip like invisible rain upon the thirsty soil. Animals have adapted to navigate by smell and sound rather than sight, knowing that vision can vanish in an instant when the mist rolls in. Even human societies, from ancient fishermen to modern coastal dwellers, have been shaped by the rhythms and moods of the marine layer, building their lives around its comings and goings. And still, despite centuries of observation and study, the marine layer retains a mystique that refuses to be fully unraveled. It moves not with the chaotic randomness of a storm but with the patient deliberation of something alive. It responds to forces both local and distant, the setting of the sun, the shifting of distant pressure systems, the silent pull of ocean currents, weaving them together into its timeless ballet. In many ways, the marine layer stands as a reminder of the planet's deeper, more ancient cycles, patterns of air and water that have danced across the Earth for millions of years, long before the first human eyes ever watched a wall of fog roll across the land and felt the primal awe of its touch. While the marine layer often seems like a single, monolithic wall moving inland, a closer look reveals a far more intricate and layered phenomenon, one shaped not only by temperature and moisture but also by the hidden complexities of geography, wind patterns, and even the unseen architecture of the land itself. It's here, within the delicate interplay of earth, air, and ocean, that the true depth of the marine layer's mystery comes to life, revealing a dynamic system far more complex than a simple mass of drifting fog. One of the most fascinating aspects of the marine layer lies in its relationship with the terrain it encounters. Unlike a blunt force smashing blindly into the coast, the fog is astonishingly sensitive to the contours of the land. Hills, cliffs, valleys, and urban structures all sculpt and steer its flow, creating a living tapestry of movement that shifts hour by hour. Along rugged coastlines, the marine layer tends to pile up against the highlands, surging up and over cliffs and slow-motion waterfalls of mist that pour into inland valleys with a silent, irresistible force. In flatter areas, the fog can fan out more evenly, blanketing fields and towns in a rolling carpet of vapor that moves with a chilling, deliberate grace. Even subtle variations in elevation can produce dramatic effects. A single ridgeline, no more than a few hundred feet tall, can become a towering barrier to the fog, forcing it to spill over the top like an overflowing cauldron. Observers on high ground often find themselves perched on islands of clarity, gazing down upon an endless white ocean stretching in all directions, the world below utterly transformed and hidden from view. It is a vision both breathtaking and surreal, a reminder that the marine layer is not merely a weather event, but a true reimagining of the landscape, reshaping what is seen and unseen with every breath of its advance. And yet, geography is not the only master to which the marine layer responds. Wind, that unseen sculptor of skies, plays an equally crucial role in shaping its movement. Coastal breezes, channeled through mountain passes and river valleys, can carve rivers and whirlpools into the fog, creating stunning dynamic patterns that unfold in real time. Watch from a high vantage point, and you may see tendrils of mist snaking inland like the arms of some great, slow-moving creature, stretching and curling through the terrain in a silent ballet that feels almost too deliberate to be entirely natural. This interaction between fog and wind can create astonishingly localized effects. One neighborhood might be swallowed in total whiteout, while just a few blocks away the sun still shines brightly. A single gust of inland wind can tear a hole in the fog, forming a swirling, temporary window into the blue sky above, only for the mist to close ranks again moments later, as if reluctant to release its grip on the land. It is a reminder of how alive and reactive the marine layer can be, a system sensitive to the slightest nudges, capable of breathtaking displays of both power and subtlety. Even the time of day exerts its quiet influence over the marine layer's behavior. In the early morning hours, when the land is at its coolest, the fog tends to be at its thickest and most pervasive, hugging the ground with a tenacity that seems almost unbreakable. As the sun rises and warms the earth, the marine layer often begins to retreat, thinning and lifting, allowing patches of sunlight to break through like spotlights on a ghostly stage. But there are days when the fog refuses to yield, clinging stubbornly to the surface well into the afternoon, or even lingering until nightfall, defying expectations and reshaping daily life around its enduring presence. This variability, the fact that the marine layer does not always behave the same way, even under seemingly similar conditions, only adds to its mystique. It is not a predictable, mechanical system that can be easily charted and forecasted. It is a living, breathing entity, responsive to an intricate web of factors that are still not fully understood. A slight change in ocean temperature hundreds of miles offshore, a distant shift in atmospheric pressure, or the timing of inland heat buildup can all conspire to alter the marine layer's behavior in ways that defy simple explanation. And within the heart of the marine layer, the experience becomes even more otherworldly. Visibility can shrink to just a few feet, reducing the vast, open world to a claustrophobic cocoon of damp whiteness. Sounds become muted and distorted, taking on strange, echoing qualities that make it difficult to locate their source. The moisture in the air clings to skin and clothing, a constant, invisible presence that seeps into every pore. Moving through the fog feels less like walking through air and more like wading through some dense, tactile medium, a physical reminder of the unseen forces at play all around. For those who live along the coasts where the marine layer holds sway, these experiences become woven into the fabric of daily life. Entire cultures have adapted to its rhythms, crafting everything from architecture to agriculture around its capricious moods. Fishermen have learned to navigate by sound and instinct when the world disappears around them. Farmers have built their livelihoods on the moisture that the fog delivers to their fields. Even city life bends to its presence, with morning commutes delayed by fog advisories and the familiar skyline transformed into an ever-shifting panorama of shadow and light. There are places where the marine layer has become so iconic that it is almost a cultural symbol in its own right. Nowhere is this more true than in cities like San Francisco, where the fog, often affectionately named Carl, becomes a daily player in the city's life and lore. Here, the marine layer is not just weather but character, an ever-present reminder that even in the heart of a bustling metropolis, the wild, ancient forces of the earth still hold sway. And so, as we delve deeper into the possible causes behind these mesmerizing walls of fog, the marine layer emerges not merely as a meteorological explanation but as a phenomenon of profound beauty, complexity, and wonder. It is a system shaped by countless forces, both seen and unseen, operating across distances and timescales that defy easy comprehension. To stand before its advancing edge, to watch the land vanish, the sky surrender, and the world soften into a misty dreamscape, is to glimpse, however briefly, the living heart of the earth itself. Yet, as convincing and natural as the marine layer explanation might be, there are those who look upon these moving walls of fog and sense something more, something that can't be so easily tied to predictable atmospheric conditions or coastal breezes. It's a feeling that stirs deep within when watching the mist churn and twist, almost as if guided by an invisible hand, responding not merely to physics but to something altogether more elusive. It is in these moments, as reason gives way to awe, that the mind begins to wonder, what if the fog itself is not entirely natural? What if, hidden within that roiling expanse, there is a force at work beyond our current understanding? Some researchers and imaginative thinkers alike have floated a far more unconventional theory, one that suggests the wall of fog might not simply be a product of cold oceans and warm air, but instead the result of an experimental technology at play, perhaps even something unintentionally bleeding into our reality from the cutting edges of science. Whispered among certain fringe circles is the idea that the fog could, in fact, be a byproduct of atmospheric manipulation experiments, a barely understood side effect of humankind's growing ability, or reckless attempts, to tamper with the sky itself. The idea finds its roots in the increasingly advanced world of climate engineering, a field that until recently belonged strictly to the realms of science fiction. Proposals to combat global warming through geoengineering have been discussed for decades, seeding clouds to induce rain, launching reflective particles into the upper atmosphere to deflect sunlight, even building massive ground-based arrays designed to alter local weather patterns. These ideas, while theoretically possible, are fraught with unknown consequences, and many experts warn that we are woefully unprepared to predict the long-term side effects of such interventions. And yet, what if such experiments have already begun, quietly, secretly, away from the public eye? What if, somewhere beyond the reach of conventional news, test projects have been set into motion, generating side effects that we are only now beginning to witness? The notion that the towering, living wall of fog could be an unintended consequence of clandestine weather experiments isn't as far-fetched as it first sounds. After all, the manipulation of tiny particles in the atmosphere, aerosols, chemical agents, or even nanotechnology, could theoretically cause localized disruptions in humidity, temperature, and wind flow, creating conditions ripe for the birth of unnatural fog formations. Consider for a moment the appearance of this fog, its unnatural consistency, its bizarre, almost intelligent movement, its chilling refusal to dissipate even under conditions that should normally break it apart. Some witnesses report seeing the fog behave almost like a liquid creature, flowing around obstacles, curling into impossible shapes, and at times, seeming to resist the natural pull of the wind. These strange observations fuel the speculation that what we're witnessing might not be fog at all in the traditional sense, but a dense suspension of engineered particles, a human-made phenomenon designed for some undisclosed purpose, whether benevolent, experimental, or more ominous still. The science behind such possibilities is tantalizingly real. Theoretical models suggest that microparticles, when released into the atmosphere in large enough quantities, could alter the very fabric of local weather. If these particles were designed to remain suspended for long periods, to refract light in specific ways, or to interact with electromagnetic fields, they could produce visual effects remarkably similar to, but subtly different from, natural fog. The result? A wall of mist that moves with eerie purpose, refracts sound in strange ways, and refuses to behave according to the normal rules of meteorology. And if that were not enough to spark the imagination, some have speculated even further. What if these walls of engineered mist are not merely accidents, but tests? Early prototypes of weather control systems, designed for military or strategic purposes, being trialed far from the eyes of the general public? In this light, the fog becomes not a passive event, but an active tool, a means to obscure, to conceal, or even to influence. Picture vast stretches of fog deployed not by nature, but by deliberate design, used to hide sensitive operations, shield experimental aircraft, or cloak installations from satellite surveillance. The possibilities are as chilling as they are expansive. And even if the original intent were benign, perhaps a misguided effort to increase rainfall in drought-stricken regions, the unintended side effects could ripple outward in ways no one anticipated, creating anomalies like the mysterious, living walls of mist that are now being reported more frequently across the globe. Adding another layer of intrigue is the way certain regions seem more prone to these events than others, not always the typical coastal environments where marine layers naturally occur. Inland areas, urban centers, even remote deserts have, on occasion, reported sudden, inexplicable fog formations that defy the usual weather patterns. Could it be mere coincidence? Or could these be the experimental footprints of human tampering, the fingerprints of a technology still in its infancy, spreading tendrils of mist where none should exist? And what of the strange sensations that so many report upon entering these dense walls of fog? Feelings of disorientation, time dilation, and even the odd perception that the air itself carries a subtle hum, a resonance just at the edge of hearing? Skeptics dismiss these accounts as tricks of the mind, the result of limited visibility and heightened nerves. Yet when such experiences are repeated again and again, across different geographies and among unrelated witnesses, it becomes harder to wave them away as mere imagination. Could it be that within the mist, something more is happening, interactions at the molecular level, subtle shifts in electromagnetic fields, or even distortions in sensory perception caused by the presence of engineered materials? If the fog is not entirely natural, but a product of human invention, what unknown effects might it be having on those who wander into its embrace? The implications stretch the mind, inviting a new way of seeing what at first glance appears ordinary. The fog ceases to be merely a collection of water droplets drifting on the breeze. Instead, it becomes a dynamic, perhaps even conscious entity, the result of forces we have only just begun to unleash, and of consequences we have yet to fully understand. As we peer into the dense, rolling mist, watching it twist and churn like some great living tapestry, the question lingers: are we witnessing a simple act of nature, or the first, ghostly tendrils of humanity's reach exceeding its grasp? If we allow ourselves to entertain the possibility that this phenomenon, this moving wall of mist, is more than a mere quirk of weather, the implications become staggering. Whether the fog is a natural byproduct of human experimentation or an intentional creation, it prompts a deeper reflection on the path humanity is treading. In our pursuit of control over nature, in our insatiable desire to bend the elements to our will, we may be stepping into territories that were never meant to be disturbed. The appearance of such strange, living fog could be a silent messenger, a quiet harbinger of the unintended consequences that lie just beyond the frontier of scientific ambition. Imagine for a moment the broader canvas. If humanity has indeed begun to engineer the atmosphere, even in small, experimental ways, we are tampering with a system so vast, so intricate, that our understanding barely scratches the surface. The atmosphere is not simply a backdrop to human activity, it is the very breath of life for every creature that walks, swims, or flies on this earth. It is a living, dynamic entity, interconnected in ways we are only beginning to fathom. introducing new variables into such a delicate system, variables like engineered particles, electromagnetic fields, or unknown chemical agents, is not just risky. It is profound in its potential consequences. The presence of these strange walls of fog could be the first outward symptom of a deeper transformation, one that humanity has initiated without fully comprehending. In seeking to master the skies, we may be setting in motion a cascade of effects that could ripple across ecosystems, weather patterns, and even the very climate itself. What begins as a localized anomaly, a wall of fog twisting and moving against all expectation, could, over time, grow into something far larger, reshaping regions, disrupting habitats, altering the fundamental rhythms of nature. And it begs an even more unsettling question: if the fog is, in fact, an experimental byproduct, who holds the knowledge of what has been unleashed? Are these endeavors being conducted under the careful stewardship of responsible hands? Or are they the reckless experiments of entities too eager to innovate, too impatient to consider the cost? History has shown, time and again, that technological leaps often outpace ethical considerations. The splitting of the atom, the unlocking of genetic codes, the rise of artificial intelligence, each monumental advancement has carried within it seeds of both unimaginable progress and profound peril. The fog, then, becomes a metaphor as much as a mystery. It is the veil that shrouds not only the land it covers but the very future of humanity's relationship with the natural world. We stand at a precipice, gazing into the mist, uncertain whether what lies beyond is a new dawn or a gathering storm. If we continue down a path of unchecked atmospheric engineering, the effects may not announce themselves loudly. They may whisper at first, in strange weather, in crops that grow differently, in migratory patterns that shift inexplicably. Subtle at first, but building, accumulating, until the changes can no longer be ignored. Beyond the environmental consequences, there are profound philosophical and ethical implications to consider as well. In creating technologies that can manipulate something as fundamental as the air itself, we are entering into a new covenant with nature, one in which the traditional boundaries between the natural and the artificial begin to blur. If we can fabricate fog, shift rainfall, or even alter temperatures on demand, what then becomes natural? And if we are capable of such feats, what responsibility do we bear for the outcomes, both intended and unforeseen? The moving wall of fog challenges us, not merely to understand its mechanics, but to reckon with its meaning. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of progress, that with every new power we acquire, we inherit a deeper, graver responsibility. The fog, dense and impenetrable, mirrors our own uncertainty, the blindness with which we often rush forward, driven by the thrill of discovery, heedless of the long shadows our innovations may cast. There is, in all of this, a strange kind of poetry. For centuries, fog has symbolized mystery, the unknown, the hidden realms that lie just out of sight. How fitting, then, that in this new age of technological prowess, it is once again the fog, now perhaps of our own making, that serves as a symbol, reminding us that there are still forces beyond our comprehension, still realms where caution must temper ambition. The implications stretch even further when we consider the social and political dimensions. If weather and atmosphere can be manipulated, even on a small scale, it introduces a new axis of power. Nations, corporations, even clandestine groups could vie for control over the skies themselves, weaponizing weather, cloaking activities, or engineering climates to suit their needs. The wall of fog, in this light, could represent not only an environmental tipping point but a geopolitical one as well, heralding a future where control of the air becomes as fiercely contested as control of land and sea once was. And so we find ourselves staring into the mist, wrestling with questions that have no easy answers. What have we done? What are we becoming? The wall of fog moves not just across the land, but across our collective consciousness, a living, breathing testament to the unintended consequences of human ingenuity. It whispers to us of futures both wondrous and terrifying, of a world reshaped by our own hand, for better or for worse. The answers, if they come at all, will not be found easily. They will emerge slowly, as through a dense fog, revealing themselves only to those who are willing to look, to question, to consider not just what we can do, but what we should do. The wall of fog is moving like it's alive, and in a way, perhaps it is. Perhaps it is the living embodiment of the crossroads at which humanity now stands, caught between wonder and warning, ambition and humility, creation and consequence. In the end, the wall of living fog remains an enigma, a phenomenon that challenges our senses, our science, and perhaps even our very place in the natural order. Whether a quirk of the environment, a hidden force of nature, or something far more extraordinary, it reminds us that not all mysteries are meant to be unraveled easily. Some are meant to humble us, to whisper that the world still holds secrets beyond our grasp, waiting, watching, and moving just beyond the veil. If you're captivated by the strange, the unexplained, and the questions that stretch beyond the edge of human understanding, make sure to subscribe and like this video. Your support helps us continue navigating these shadowed paths, bringing you deeper into the mysteries that most dare not explore. Stay curious, stay watchful, and join us as we push even further into the unknown.